My dad started in 1950. He worked as a tool and die apprentice and then as a tool and die journeyman in Mansfield. Left the employment he was at and started Shiloh Tool and Die in 1950. As he grew through 1950 to 1960, he moved to Mansfield here, again with a tool and die shop, and then started with what was then Empire Detroit Steel. And they were in the blanking business at that time, chose to get out of the blanking business. My dad was doing die repair for them at that period, and that's how he got into the blanking business, is when Empire asked him to not only repair dies, but start making parts for them.
And Mick was able to get the work from Empire, and then he established his customer list, and it grew, and here's a fellow that started out in an old chicken coop over at Shiloh.
In 1993, when we went public with Shiloh, they were a $500 million company, had 14 plants and about 3,000 people. For a man that was in World War II and was a tail gunner or nose gunner in a B-24 and flew 52 missions, starting a business probably wasn't very hard for him.
If he had an opinion on or an answer to a question, it was never evasive. It was always straightforward and honest, and you knew immediately what was going to happen.
He always called a spade, and he didn't beat around the bushes. You knew right where you stood all the time with Mick. He, and as well as his customers or anyone else, knew where he stood.
One thing Mick always told me, he said, before you go out on the road for the first time, he said, there's two rules that'll get you out of trouble. Rule number one, the customer's always right. When it doesn't look like rule number one is going to work, you go to rule number two, which is go back to rule number one and work it out. Because without the customer, we're nothing. So I've never seen a man so customer-oriented like Mick and Jim were, both the fellas were.
You know, Mick was always a hard worker all his life. And you could always tell that when you grab his hands, you knew they were old rough hands, that he knew they'd been in the work.
You know, we were asked at that time, why are you in business, or why do you do the things you do? Is it, what's your main focus? And he and Jim both were always the people that they employed and the families that they employed. The first thing they ever said in those interviews was never about money. It was about the people.
The Fanellos are such trusting people. They bring you in, here's the job we need you to do. We trust you that you're going to do your job the best of your ability. There were times at Shiloh when things, economy was down and there were price controls on, and we had a tradition of hams and turkeys at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and there was a lot of pressure to cut those programs, and Mick says absolutely not. I don't care if we have to borrow the money to go buy those turkeys. We're going to have turkeys at Thanksgiving. There were people that said we needed to lay people off, and Mick and Jim said, absolutely not. We don't care if we have to paint this building 3 times over. We're going to keep them employed, and when business picks up, then these guys will be ready to hit the ground running. If we lay these guys off, we aren't just laying an individual off, we're laying off a family. And they had been in the shoes of being laid off and the impact on their families. So they were very concerned about it. They knew what was going to be the impact. It wasn't just a man losing a job.
He worked for other organizations in the community to support them with his own time and ability and financially.
He's very family-oriented. I don't know of anything he doesn't know about my family. I don't know, no matter when you run into him, he'll ask about my wife, my kids by name. They all know him.
You couldn't be as successful as he was if the people working there didn't appreciate him and like him.
When we left Shiloh, we were about ready to leave. I had not announced that I was leaving. Mike and Mick had worked things out, and he came up in the hallway and said, are you coming with us or not? And I said, well, I think I am, Mick, but I said, I'm a little nervous. I've been here my whole life and have a pretty good job, and scared about starting over, you know. And he goes, well, I'm pushing 80 and I'm gonna start over. What's your problem? So he said, you have 2 weeks, give him notice, let's go.
He loves to have fun. He does have fun. And he has fun working. He had fun working at that plant and in his business. And he treated everybody with courtesy and supportive of people who were working. Every time we played golf on the number 1 tee, he'd say, "Scat, there's no cussing today." And that would last about 10 seconds.
I can't say enough about him. I don't know what our family would have done without him. I've always had a job. First time I went looking for a job, I found one. I've been there ever since.